We're live. Yay.
We're live. This is Senate Appropriations, January 6th, first day of the session, first day of the Appropriations Committee for this year. But I thought we would go around a little bit. If people have any comments that they want, opening comments that they want to say. I will start. I'll do the reverse that the chair of transportation did for he ended. So I will start.
I spoke at the beginning and the end.
That's true. And I think you also spoke in the middle several times after each person. But I came up with the 3 C's that I want our committee to keep in mind. Our Constitution has this line in it about not having expenditures that unless they're more beneficial to the community than to the individual. I thought there was a line in there about not taking money out of people's pockets unless it's actually referred to money in pockets, but I couldn't find it. But there's a line in there that does say that the legislature and those that are spending money and raising taxes should make sure that any money that we're spending is better for the community than it would be in the individual's use. So I think that's an important thing for us to remember. Our constituents, not only the things that our constituents need and ask us for, but also just that we're showing that we have a functional government and that government can be helpful and that they can trust in the process and their legislative elected representatives to do the right thing for them as far as the Constitution, but also the needs that we have out there and the wants that people have and they're kind of striving for hope for Vermont's future. I think that's something that's very important as we build the budget. And then in our community here in the legislature and in this committee, I thought we did a good job last year of having a committee that worked well together, that was good and when we disagreed and were disagreeable, and I thought we were very efficient in our work and still had a decent time of it. And so I want to make sure that we're continuing to build that community and come on. And that's the main things. Those 3 C's: the Constitution, our constituents, and the community are camaraderie. And I think there's a lot of talk this year about it's going to be a tough budget year. I think mainly that's going to be because the federal spending is so in question, and they're like, we have a grant, we don't have a grant. We just got this new rural innovation health grant, which is going to be helpful, but who knows, it could be taken away. We have several lawsuits for several funding programs in a process that may get settled and we get the money or we don't get the money. The feds may extend the Affordable Care Act subsidies, or they may not. Those are going to be unknowns, but they're big dollar numbers and we can't backfill all of them. But I think we'll have discussions about, are there some parts of our healthcare system that we will want to, or we need to. We will go through some of the BAA stuff today just to get started on that. But also I've asked JFO to come in at the end of the week to remind us kind of what we did last year, what was in the budget. If you remember, we set aside $110 million for federal what-ifs. We only spent 7 of that. And so it's important to look at what we did last year as we prepare to look at the Budget Adjustment Act, what the governor's proposing, and as we prepare for the 27 budget. It looks like revenues are about what we expected them to be. We're not going to have the one-time funds that we've had in other years, but I'm still fingers crossed that we're not going to have a rescission, because then that would be very difficult, because then we have to go look at the budget and say, what are we going to take out? But we still could. We don't know what the economists are going to do. We're going to find out in the next 2 weeks, right?
A week from Friday.
A week from Friday. We'll see if they think they're seeing signs that the economy is slow to the point where they're going to change what they think our revenues can be for this year, as well as see what their projections are for 27. So that'll all roll out. We'll kind of go over that later this week. So the rest of this week is going to just getting started on the budget adjustment testimony, because I think the effort is to get that out soon this year. So those are my opening comments. And so we'll just go around if anybody has any other opening comments or questions that they have. Senator Westman?
Do you want to start with me?
Yes, of course. Get it out of the way.
I would say my thinking in the budget and the budget process this year, it's really going to come down to what's a want and what's a need. And I think we'll have to be focused on where are the real needs. It's a little thing, but in the fall, as we ran into a whole bunch of the problems with EBT cards and it looked like the money wasn't coming through and all that, we directly put money to the food bank that they gave directly out to all the food shelves across the state. I a little bit smiled because this committee had 3 times, it was our initiative in the House, and fought us early in that, but figured out a way to direct money directly back to the food shelves. We have basically unpaid staff, no overhead, and are directly facing the people that need the money the most. And learn to do a lot of thinking around that. What's a want, what's a need, and how do we most efficiently get money out there? So for me, that was an example of a precedent that this committee around this table had done that I think is vital. For me, food and keeping people warm are top of my list. The other piece that I'll be looking in all of this, it's one of the few times that there have been issues out there where every fund in state government now is having issues. The T fund is, as you well know, is I would say on the verge of disaster. We're looking at projected double-digit increases in the end fund, and you talking. And the general fund is somewhat been used as the punching by everybody. The only reason we haven't dealt with transportation before this is we've had surplus general fund money come over to save us the last few years. And the general fund now is not going to have that capacity because we're facing particularly areas like Medicaid cuts in that. So all 3 funds and the relationship between those funds, I think this committee is going to have to take the lead of all of them to, is there a way to better think the relationship between all of them?
Thank you. Senator Norris?
Thank you. Well, the chair of transportation kind of spoke on my thunder there, but we'll let that go anyways. Yeah, we're going to face a very tough session between the wants and the needs, and there's plenty of both. But one of my, from our brief conversation, one of my larger concerns is I know that we've addressed, we're attempting to address the homelessness and health and all the stuff here, but I have a large concern, as the 3 of you probably can relate to, is on our transportation. I know we give money to a lot of different areas, but our roads, our highways, and our infrastructure is falling apart. And I don't think we can afford to lose that $200+ million to feds if we don't come up with that matching on this. But I think that's key. And there may or may not be, depending on this committee's recommendations, some folks that may not get, they used to get it, shall we say, but no matter where you're going, you have to go on the roads, you have to go on the bridges, whatever else. If you don't have those, and so not in dire straits, then we need to address that situation. We need to fix that. And it's not something that's going to come easily, but we can't just throw $220 million out the window because we can't come up with a $33 million to match the federal. So that's one of my key points here. But until we get to stay in the state or the budget address here, there's a lot of concerns, but I'll leave it with transportation right now. Our highways and infrastructure is really in the back of my mind.
And I think when I've talked about constituents, having passable roads is something that constituents feel like is a basic level of government. If we can't do that, they start questioning all other parts of government.
Yeah, considering the difficult budget environment that we are in, I'll just say it reminds me of a little bit of when I was mayor of Montpelier during COVID, and we had to have a budgeting process in which we had to make really difficult choices just to keep the lights on. And it sort of brought a new level of scrutiny to what was a want versus a need. And even when we say, you know, these are the things that we are used to saying our needs, we had to cut even from there. And so when I think about the level of potential difficulty that we may be facing, in my mind, it becomes this sort of triage of like, what is most important that we keep funded and go out from there, because to a degree, like we may all draw the line at a different place for what is a need. And so being able to prioritize the parts of government that are critical, I think is pretty important. And having said that, I am very interested in keeping an eye to the future in where we're headed and how the money that we are spending sets us up for more expenditure in the future or for more returns in the future. My vision for Vermont in general is a place that can feed itself, that can house itself, that can transport itself. And so wanting to keep holding that vision of where we want to go, I think is important, especially when times are really difficult, and making sure that we're continuing to at least try to make the investments that are going to give back to us in the future. So that's it for me.
Thank you. Bruce, we're just going around and priorities or opening comments.
Okay, so I talked this morning about this committee and the general fund and how it interacts with the ed fund recently, which has become a little alarming to me, the extent to which, one way that I think about it in my mind is we have 119 districts, they're all setting their own budgets, their voters pass them, then typically we're buying the rate down from there. So it's as though we have 119 little appropriations committees that are appropriating money out of our general fund, and we're allowing that to happen by making that transfer. But at a certain point, it has to stop, because I think when we're done with all of our needs and the supplying the agencies with the money that we've agreed on, we have sometimes like $100 million left in money that can go to extreme needs in 100 different areas. If we not only don't have that, but we lose 200 million of the rest of the budget, everything starts to get impoverished. So that's my number one priority, is trying to make sure that we're moving to a lesser growth in ed spending, lesser transfers in the general fund, less money going to buy down the rates. And I think we can only do that by asking more of our school boards in terms of cutting budgets, among other things like reference-based pricing for healthcare or renegotiating contracts, etc. And then that's a systemic thing. But then in terms of my areas of the budget, there are still two long-term projects that I have my eye on. One is Vermont State University, making sure that we don't say, okay, we bridged you, we got you to your new branding endpoint, and now we're gonna let you go with no help. So I am looking for what we can do still for them in terms of transitioning them into a completely unified system. And then the other one is childcare. So, I think in some ways, the best thing we've done in the last 4 years is that childcare bill. We've protected it, the last 2 years. And we've, in certain ways, been able to make a little more robust the money that's going there and make sure the uptake is, keep going up so that we have more centers, more slots, more kids and families being helped, with the payroll tax revenue. So I have my eye on those two things especially, but overall, it's thinking about the problem in the ed fund. I mentioned the transportation fund this morning, as just one example of what we would otherwise do for the transportation fund without delay. We may not be able to do because of that couple $100 million or 100 or 150, whatever it turns out to be, that we need to buy right now. So that's my stuff.
And you brought something for Senator Westman to eat.
Actually, these donuts were bought by my sister, and she specifically told me to bring them into a purse. So if you don't eat one, you're insulting my family.
So I'll have a donut.
I just make a comment.
Yeah.
Only balance the T fund because the general fund was generous to us.
Yeah, a similar situation, but
It's
Right.
So, not to go on, but I mean, I think what Ann said about prioritizing our needs is important. I mean, we're gonna have way more needs than we have revenues to keep up with those wants. And I think prioritizing those are really crucial. And I won't repeat, I agree with everything both of you guys said too. But I also think we ought to take a really close look at COVID era programs that I think, in my opinion, need a good scrubbing. And they were designed with era funding and COVID related funding to be temporary. And I think we're continuing those programs with state dollars. And I don't know how long we can do that. So I'm not saying to do away with all of them. I'm saying take a good look at it.
good thing to look through.
Yes.
Sarah Lyons?
Boy, I think everybody said everything. The concern about basic needs is pretty important. Maslow's hierarchy looks at, food and heat, and so we do need to pay attention to what people need at a very basic level. Beyond that, for me, the budget should reflect what you were talking about in terms of the sense of community. Vermont has always been reaching out to help neighbors. That's who we are. And we don't want that to be lost when we're debating a budget. We can't. And then finally, the other area of concern that I have is that we make knee-jerk responses and reactions to what the federal government is doing, or an episode, an event, and that we continue to make decisions in a broader context. So we're not, if we were to make the decision about fully funding SNAP or fully funding all of the support that folks have lost from their healthcare premiums, we take all of that, and then we also take money and put it into reducing property taxes. We need to do that in balance. We need to understand what the effect is, and rather than simply making a decision at one point in time. Doesn't mean that I don't like any one or all of those, but you can dress it up, but you can't. Yeah. Anyway, so no, everything that I think we all have a sense of the importance of transportation. No question there. We know how important it is to look at our local needs, whether it's our food bank or other areas. So it's not an easy time. I'm concerned that because the federal government makes a decision about what those priorities are for forcing people who are in Medicaid to have a work requirement without regard for their ability to do work. We don't need to just follow suit on that. We need to have a very broad conversation about what individuals need to support the community and vice versa.
Well, it's great to have you from health and welfare here, because healthcare costs are like,
Gonna be a mess.
that's big issues. Okay, so just other quick things before we hear from the Commissioner Gresham. This is just an annual thing about the reports that we get. You can look at that and check which reports we care about or don't care about. Our committee, the budget assignments are the same, and else emailed it to you in case you forgot what parts of the budget that you're in charge of. And we're gonna start off with Commissioner Gresham to talk about the Budget Adjustment Act right away. And I said before you were here, that on Friday, we're gonna have a session with JFO to look back what we did last year and how things have changed since we were last here. But we're gonna start off with testimony around the VA. So welcome, Commissioner.
We have the,
Yes.
Commissioner too.
Hardy.
I'll look at them.
No.
Afternoon, everyone.
Yeah.
We have a PA here that is going to meet all of your priorities.
That's great.
I listened to them, I took notes.
So one of the, sorry, Commissioner, I think the commissioner's handouts or, VA stuff is online. If in general, if we want to, just as we go through the session, talk to Elle about whether you want paper. If you only want paper for some things, I think some people got a handout, but we'll just kind of have to work one-on-one with Elle on whether she's not going to print everything out unless we talk to her about it. So.
Do you want one? I have one extra copy that can be shared amongst the committee for anybody who needs one, and Senator Baruch has one that he can choose to share.
Then it is on our.
And it's on his outlook.
Which one?
Oh, I am.
Okay.
Bending thing.
Sorry for the.
No, that's all right.
Be right back. Okay.
So anyway, thank you for listening to us. We presented this very document and language December 16th or so in the House. So we're very happy to come before you and present it here. Just starting with some context. So we began the process of the budget adjustment by, as we always do, looking at our revenue. What do we have available? There are some years when we have very little available, so it's a very neat document. There are other years when, as you probably remember, we've had a lot of revenue available. This year, we begin with approximately $121 million. And the majority of that is from three sources. You folks remember the emergency board. It seems like a while ago. It wasn't a while ago. It's back in July when they upgraded the forecast for the fiscal year 2026. Since the budget that you folks passed and the governor signed was based on a revenue outlook that was $77 million lower than that. When the $77 million upgrade came, that immediately becomes available revenue. There was also about a little under $13 million left unallocated on the bottom line, which is unusual. Typically, budgets allocate all revenue, or it goes into the kind of waterfall construct where it goes to the balance reserve and pensions. But this year, after the budget passed, I believe it was after the budget passed, the government vetoed a couple of bills, H91. Most importantly, that would have a $10 million set aside. You guys set aside money for that bill, which never became law. So that was there. there were a couple of small corrections, that added another $2.5 million. So almost $13 million adding to the $77 million. And then as we do, every year, there are some reversions. So we're, banking on, or we're getting about $21 million of reversions. And those are appropriations from prior years that are no longer. Yeah, so we revert.
And that 77 million doesn't deal with any of the money we set aside in our contingency list. If you're not touching that in this bill.
That's in addition to that. So, I mean, again, it just kind of illustrates what kind of world we were in,
Yeah.
where you guys remember appropriate, I think it's $118 million of contingency appropriations. All of those were built. We had, I think, an additional $2 million still left lying around that went into the balance reserve and the pensions. And then e-board meets and they say, well, that plus another $77 million we're anticipating in fiscal 26. So, I mean, this will all seem quaint, I think, in the next few years, or possibly, it's not a forecast, but it just seems bizarre. So in net, we have about $121 million to allocate. This bill makes net $48 million of additional appropriations, which is reduced to 46 million by 2 million of net transfers into the general fund. So there's more money you'll see when we go through the transfer section, say from, I believe it was sports wagering or liquor and so on. So there's some net transfers in that balance out those net 48 million appropriations. Also, by the way, that's a net 48 million. There are more appropriations than that, but there are some money saving or some appropriations where we reduce spending authority because we didn't think we would need it all. So on a net basis, it comes to 48 million of additional appropriations. There were $2 million net transfers in. So that's a total of 46 million of additional general fund uses. And taking that, subtracting it from 121 million available, leaves roughly 75 million, little 74.9, I think, on the bottom line after all adjustments are done. In the language section, you'll note section 50. You'll see what the governor proposes to do with this sum. I think you've probably all looked or heard. We are setting up, we are temporarily reserving this money and fencing it off to use for property tax relief. So the way that works, the mechanism is we reserve it, and that allows it to, and then we carry it forward into the following year, and then we own it. So that sum of just under 75 million is what we have left over after all appropriations and stuff. I would note that this BAA, again, kind of harkens back to the good old days when all it was a series of accounting measures. There's no policy in this. This is a clean budget adjustment. By that, I mean, we didn't put any initiatives in here. And again, in past years, we've done that because we've had a fair amount of revenue. Some of it was kind of, we wanted to get right at, put in funny proposals that could be accepted or not, but do it early. So we have reserved just under 75 million. We know we have an education funding challenge, as I heard earlier. And we also have an unsettled revenue challenge. So you can, with those kind of two comments, you can anticipate that the budget that the governor will deliver a couple of weeks from now will probably be pretty lean by that. I mean, so.
Can I ask a question on section 50 on the education fund part,
Yes, sir.
unreserving that 13 million?
Yes, sir.
Is that to add off to help buy down, use that money to buy down the property taxes, or what is the impact of that? 13 million unreserved education fund part. I assume that's also part of the 60. There is a ellipsis there. Do you know what I'm talking about?
I do not. Is that in the language?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Page 36.
Oh, page 6.
Top of page 36.
Oh, top of. Oh, okay. So that is, actually, top of page 36. So, no, that is a kind of a classic. I like to say that, yeah, and you'll see that in the spreadsheet we're going through. That just indicates that we're all human. Occasionally we make mistakes. So there was $13 million set aside in not the current year, but the prior year's budget that was part of a surplus they had that the body and the governor agreed to set aside for the following year's property tax relief. And it was set aside by reserving, putting it in a reserve.
Okay.
And
Just
the way it works with reserving is you have to unreserve it in order to use it. So it was never unreserved. So when we went to, grab it to offset property taxes,
so
we couldn't.
she just didn't?
So we just left it there, and then in budget adjustment, what we're doing was unreserving it. And what we did is we actually we took it out of the balance, the stabilizations.
Okay.
So this is essentially repaying.
Okay.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
in that same section, it says the first 74 plus million of any fiscal year end 2026 general fund balance otherwise subject to reservation in the balance reserve and prior to any child care contribution reservation shall instead be reserved for 2027. I'm just wondering about that. What are we talking about in terms of superseding a child care contribution reservation? I'm unclear on that.
So you'll see later on also in this language, actually section 53.
You're right. The new construct being proposed to handle a particular technical problem with fourth quarter childcare contributions.
Yeah.
And so a reserve is being set up to accommodate that problem. And so it's a new construct being proposed, and that's what this refers to. You want me to take a crack at it? The issue, Senator believes, is that childcare contributions are withheld from payrolls in the fourth quarter of a particular fiscal year. The withholding is taking place along with the other tax withholdings that are taking place with the payroll process. However, the absolute amount, the actual amount to be deposited in the child care fund is not known until the subsequent November of the next fiscal year, because there's a reconciliation process that the actual returns, the withholding takes place automatically out of payroll. The returns are not due until the subsequent quarter. So the actual amount going into the fund isn't a known quantity at the time of the close of the fiscal year. However, the mechanisms was originally set up to make the deposit at the close of the fiscal year into the fund, but that amount's not known until the following November. So we had to work with the Joint Fiscal Office this year on a one-time basis to come up with a workaround to ensure that the excess, because it all sits in the general fund until that subsequent the returns are filed, and then the reconciliations performed, and then there's a transfer from the general fund to the child care fund. However, what would have happened this year, we found at the time of closeout, was the surplus in the general fund would have simply been swept and gone to the pension reserve funds, right? There would have been nothing left. There would have been nothing left. You see, if you just follow the mechanisms in the big bill. So we had to work together to come up with like a one-time process to estimate the amount and reserve it, ensure that it was reserved so it could ultimately be transferred to the child care fund. We propose in the Budget Adjustment Act, recommended by the governor, to set up an annual construct of making this estimate and making this reserve. That's the reserve that's being referred to there. It's a new reserve. It's a new thing.
Got it.
And we worked with your legislative joint fiscal office to try to make this happen. From a practical standpoint, what we did was we called up the tax department and said, how much do you think is the fourth quarter amount, you know, essentially April 1 through June 30th amount of payroll tax?
So
And they came to us with an estimate, and we temporarily reserved that. And then on July 1, we unreserved it. So it was still there in the general fund. But we're trying, I mean, that was kind of, I mean, it was, I think, the best thing we could do, but we just felt uncomfortable making those estimates. And I think you guys felt uncomfortable with us making those estimates in a vacuum. So we're trying to essentially make something close to what we have with the consensus revenue plans, you know, that we work with joint fiscal and the legislature to figure out what's a reasonable amount. And over the years, this will be fairly easy to have data. We just had no data.
sure.
You know, we couldn't look back. So
So if I'm understanding correctly, this is just, it's not preferring a use for the 74+ million, it's just reserving it for the next fiscal year.
That's right.
And then it's going to be distributed to CCFAP and other monies will be distributed according to the standard language for how that money is.
Which is new standard language now being proposed.
Right, and my question is, last year, you remember there was the update on the payroll tax money wasn't the same as the amount of. So we had, in a one-time basis, we had used that for other things. Do you remember what I'm talking about?
So last year, yeah, there was more revenue than was needed to execute the program. Yes.
Right.
So we moved that money to other.
And so I'm just wondering, this is unconnected to that. Okay.
Because we talked about last year, setting up a reserve instead of spending that money, putting a reserve.
Right.
This is a different kind of reserve.
Yeah.
This is just more of an accounting reserve.
This is just based on those fourth quarter receipts and ensuring that they're preserved in the general fund until such time as the exact amount is known to transfer it to the child care fund, which will be after those returns are filed in the subsequent quarter.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'll have a comment.
Yeah, I would just say we worked with the administration, Emily Byrne at the Joint Fiscal Office, to come up with the language, and it's purely a mechanical thing to make sure that the revenue that should be dedicated to the child care special fund gets to the child care special fund.
Yeah.
And we're working on like a walkthrough for house that we could do here.
Okay.
Great. Yeah, I mean, we're gonna have to go through language anyway, so this is language. I mean, the other thing I would say on this is, when we make an estimate, if we guess too high and we reserve an amount that's too much for what ultimately the payroll tax comes in, then in a sense, we're kind of robbing the balance reserve and the pensions because that money would have gone. So we're setting up a mechanism to essentially pay that back.
Yeah.
Similarly, if we guess too low, you know, we may have to reach into these other pensions to restore. So, I mean, it's little things that probably aren't worth spending a ton of time on, but it's, I think, a reasonable way the most reasonable way actually tax when they come in. You can ask them. I believe they're looking at either software that will allow the designation of payroll tax versus childcare tax. I believe. I think there's still some challenges with that. But anyway, in the perfect world, we'd be able to tell almost immediately when the revenue is remitted from, say, a company, and we would know how much is payroll tax, how much is rate withholding, but so far that remains a person.
Okay, well, thanks for going down, jumping ahead. So that.
No, that's fine. That typically is this committee's want. I've noticed. So what we've done in past years is the deputy and I have tag teamed going through. Typically, I don't think you guys have wanted to go line by line, but we're prepared to do that. Just going down the spreadsheet. When we
I don't think we need to go line by line, but if there's anything you think you should highlight, and then we'll take a closer look I looked at it, but nothing really jumped out to me as a question, but we can always have you back if we can look at something and have question.
Well, we can highlight what we think,
Yeah,
and
that'd be
then,
great.
you know, to the extent that you have other questions, we can go for.
So, starting at the top, there's, a net neutral shift from the homeowner rebate appropriation to the renter rebate appropriation. And, so that's net neutral on a general fund basis. That does it for the general government, section. Within protection, we've got, some increases in judiciary, sheriffs, and, public safety. Largest being state police. It's a fairly small amount of the state police increases related to the net costs related to the Burlington initiative. That's only about $100,000. The balance is overtime, related to the regular current services operations. There is
And that overtime beyond what we expected it to be. Like how big of a difference is that? Is that just?
well, there is, it is, and it's in part related to, vacancies. So if you have position vacancies, we're gonna need to pay existing staff at time and a half rather than at straight time. Is that
And so
part of
there was
that?
vacancies that weren't expected.
There's, I'd ask for, if you want to drill into this, in more detail, I would have public safety probably speak more accurately than, with precision than I want to do that.
Sure. That's,
I just mainly wanted to highlight the fact that it's a small amount of the overtime that's related to the Burlington initiative. That's the main takeaway I thought this committee might be interested in. It's only about 100 of the 65 total. The Criminal Justice Council is receiving some additional funding to complete a project that's been ongoing for some time, which is a curriculum review and development for the police academy training. And this should bring that work to a conclusion. Small amount to the Human Rights Commission, but it may be interesting to the committee that allows them to continue to operate without a reduction in services, which would otherwise occur based on a HUD grant of federal funds that was going away there. So the recommendation is to maintain that current services level there. There's an unusual special fund appropriation for the Cannabis Control Board. It's also reflected later in a transfer of the same amount from the general fund to the special fund. I think it's explained adequately in the sidebar. It's related to an appropriation made actually in 2022 Act 83. It was a Budget Adjustment Act. There was an $850,000 transfer to support costs associated with the lab setup for the Cannabis Control Board. And the transfer was made into the fund. Subsequent FY 23 big bill language provided for funds remaining. Basically, all the excise tax would go into their regulation special fund. And then at the end of the year, the balance remaining would be transferred to the general fund. So what happens is, in this case, the legislature transferred from the general fund into the special fund for this future lab work so they could fund all that fit up. And then it got, by this other mechanism, transferred out into the general fund. And now a couple of years later, it's time to actually complete the lab fit up and the funds aren't there. So we're making a transfer back from the general fund. I just wanted to take a minute to explain that unusual situation there. And that takes us through protection, unless there are any other questions on that section from the beginning. If not, I'll turn it over to Adam for the meat of the matter, which is human services, which typically is the most highly featured agency in the budget adjustment.
Thank you, Artie. And there are a couple of dozen different maneuvers. I mean, there's enough in here to keep Senators Lyons and Westman busy for the rest of the session in case that. But in total, there's $33 million of net appropriations. There's some savings that offset, so there's more appropriations, but on a net basis, about $33 million total use of the general fund. Plus, as Hardy will review later on, is another 11 million one time that we'll get into later. So, that's a fairly substantial amount of additional general fund. I would note, however, that their total base general fund is about 1.4 billion. So in that context, it's a little over 2% out on that. Again, I don't think it's worthwhile to go through each one, but let me just do it thematically. And I believe the folks in human services will come in here, and this will actually go along very well with what they will present too, in more detail. But the biggest thing, which is typical, is caseload. I mean, this caseload pressures. You see that in the so-called mixing bowl B301. You see the federal funds and general funds being put out to, but in the various appropriations, you see the global commitment amounts. So, for example, in B307, that's the big Medicaid program, DIVA, $33 million pressure relative to what was in the original budget. There's additional $33 million all funds, about $14 million of general fund requirement. Similarly, caseload B334.1 within daily, you got the choices for care and nursing home, emergency financial relief payments, a total of just under $27 million all funds.
What number is that again?
B334.1. And there's another 12 million general fund. So when you have the Medicaid pressures and the choices for care or nursing home pressures, there, in total, you got about $26 million of additional general fund. So, again, it's substantial. The PNMI, the private non-medical institutions, there's pressures there too. You see that in B314, albeit quite a bit smaller. And then if you look down in corrections, B338 and B339, you'll note, I think under caseload pressures, the WellPath, which is the healthcare provider to corrections, an amendment that is required when headcount basically, in our correction facilities goes above a certain number, 1,525. So that kind of triggers an additional payment to WellPath. In this case, you'll see 4.6 million extra general fund.
Is it just 4.6 if you get one over that number, or that the ratio?
That was the exact same question that they asked me in the House, and I said, I'm going to defer to the folks who know. But yes, if I were to answer that question, I'd say probably, but I can't. I mean, that would be a guess. There's also, I would note in corrections, some bills that were not paid in 25 and 26, 3.2 million of those that came in late that session, and it was pretty tight close last year. So within corrections, there's a fair amount of caseload and other pressures there. Under what I would call software pressures, there you see in B306 and DIVA, there's about $2 million of additional IT cost, which includes Gainwell, which is the behind the MMIS system, and the Medicaid data warehouse, MDWAS, that's a Deloitte payment, as well. There's some scattered Oracle licenses that required additional payments. So, again, this is not unusual, but it is just showing some pressures that were not anticipated early on. And then there's what I would call just the cost of doing business. I mean, and you could include software in that, but for example, in B315 there, you see the large increase for travel nurses. They have done, I think, a commendable job that they can talk to you about finding additional staff, and they've Their vacancy rates actually are lower than they have been, but they're still elevated. You'll note that in part, that is offset, that increase of just under 5 million general fund requirement for travel nurses is partly or mostly offset by an increase of $4 million in vacancy savings. There also, you see, in B315. So, you know, the one is not quite, but almost paying for the other. With higher vacancies, they need more travelers. But the travelers net are more expensive than the jobs that are vacant. So net, it's a loss. You see some additional payments for transportation contracts that came in more than we thought in B317 for DC 1 million and B314 for DNH for about 327,000. In B327, the secure residential treatment facility, just under $2 million. That's the Wyndham facility. And that's for sheriffs. And then just some random.
You have 327 is for sheriffs?
Yeah, B320, that's the secure residential treatment facility.
But is it the 1.99 is all for sheriffs?
No,
What do you mean?
No, so Wyndham facility is facility set up in Wyndham County Sheriff's Office building, so it's not really, it's just it occupies it occupies the same building and it's referred to, I think, colloquially as the Wyndham Sheriff's facility, but it's not this isn't a cost like paid to.
it's not a safety.
This is this is the operating cost of, I think it's something like 4 beds. It's what the operating cost associated with those.
It's not operated by the sheriffs.
It's not.
No. Okay, thank you.
You also see just to point out, there's a Planned Parenthood in New England. You'll recall that for fiscal 26 only, it's not clear whether this will be true in fiscal 27, 28, and fiscal 26. Medicaid funding was for organizations that provide medical procedures for abortions and the like. So we this is a little over $1 million of backfill that you'll see in there.
What number?
And that's B307, 309 for claims and B306 and 312. It's kind of spread out. Also in here, final note on the B300s, there are some revenue offsets. I mentioned to you that there's a $4 million vacancy savings that is substantially, though not entirely, offsetting the need for more travel nurses. That's in DNH, in B315. In corrections, there are, we believe, some GC global commitment eligible costs, about $2.5 million, predominantly healthcare related in B338. That's new corrections. Some caseloads within DCF reach up and subcare are lower than we anticipate. So that's about $2.5 million of savings. And some other like buy-in caseloads. Buy-in is a program where people with disabilities can buy into Medicaid, subsidize their Medicaid payments. So that came in about $2.3 million lower in B307. So there are some savings here that are offsetting the increases. And then if there are no other questions within B300, I would skip to the B500. I just wanted to point out.
Lines as a B300.
I have a short question around Gainwell, and I don't know that you can answer it or not, but what kind of oversight is provided to determine that the ask for reimbursement is consistent with what's actually needed given? So I've heard in the past that there's been increased more funds than necessary going in.
So I will make sure that when the folks come in from Human Services, they have.
That would be great.
Nursing homes. We've done some adjustments to rates. And this number is not over 20 million, it's 14. When are we gonna, because now it's been 4 or 5 years that we've done emergencies that are significant like this. When do we? It's 14 million.
When does it stop being an emergency?
Yeah, we're like 5 years into emergencies.
You're talking about the EFR payments.
Well, you have emergency, yes, the nursing home emergency relief fund. It's been around like 5 years and it's been, this is lower. This isn't 20 million, but if, it's practically the biggest adjustment and has been every year for 4 or 5 years now.
So I think I think the answer would be when we stop having financial problems with our institutions like the nursing homes or the NMI institutions, then that would go away. And perhaps emergency is a misnomer. Many of these institutions are in financial trouble. So when that goes away, that money goes away. Right
Does
now,
that mean that we, when does it not say that our rates are too low and
well, as you pointed out, we've addressed. Now we haven't maybe gotten to the point where they're receiving what they need, but we've addressed. We've had what for the past 3 years, 4 years. I don't remember. So the answer is I don't know. But when we stop having financial
and I this is not a criticism. I get that, but it just is like every year it's an emergency, and it's not a million or two. It's, this is 14. We've had years in the last 5 years where it's been 20. I look at it and go, at what point?
But we don't really have any option.
Well, I think that's part of the problem.
But that's the
we need
concern.
facilities.
The facilities know we don't have options, so they're just always going to come in for emergency relief. At least that's the concern that I heard. Now we're just like, they see the state as this bottomless bank account that they can always draw on. When could we put constraints on that without forcing them to close? Because if they close, we'd be in a worse situation.
Well, one example ultimately is the retreat, right? So there's an institution with the state went in, worked with them to straighten them out, to stabilize them, put a lot of restrictions on the money they receive. We have, we have agreement with them. So, do we have the horsepower to do that with every institution? We just don't think so. The retreat was kind of a classic. We needed it, too big to fail. But anyway,
We can ask Dale.
I think they'll have a more perhaps articulate response for you, but I don't think it'll be substantial.
It's not. It's. I asked the question because it's just been going on, and this is a little at 14 million. This is a little lower than it has been, and it just is like, is there a way that we could do better?
I think it's a fair question.
Okay. What's next?
There's before turning it back over, there's a one line item in the B500 section, 508, nutrition. There's the agency education believes that there'll be approximately $8 less than authority for the universal.
Okay.
So we are reverting $1 million to the bottom.
You'll see that in 508.
Okay.
And I don't remember if I can address natural resources. There are further questions on.
Right.
Okay. So in the natural resources section, relatively smaller adjustments, but there's a $210,000 increase in spending authority for fish and wildlife. That's related to a game warden request for review. There was budgeted into FY26 unanticipated 1 pay grade increase. The RFR process resulted in 2 pay grade increase for game wardens. So the additional amount required to meet that obligation.
Those all game wardens or just somewhere in a different?
Game wardens, I believe, are there's one class for,
And there's like 34.
and they were and about this much was built into the FY26 budget as an anticipated increase, but the RFR came in higher, and this is the balance required. In forest parks and recreation, about $100,000 is related to wildfire fighting efforts, which were unusual, unanticipated expense.
Who do we pay to help? We don't have it.
Well, it's overtime is the majority of that. So a little over $70,000. We did also pay Green Mountain National Forest crews that were
Probably there.
reimbursed. That's only about 14,000, but that was on national forest lands, and then there was an additional amount related to some helicopter deployments. So
But that's like renting out, like we don't own any helicopter.
I don't believe so. FDR would have to go into story in more detail.
We got the truck.
got the truck.
Hopefully they bought the truck. I don't know.
Is this a trend? You were talking about helicopter pad here in state this morning in transportation. Are you looking for a helicopter now?
Maybe.
So that does it for
What do you want?
natural resource. Oh, there's also a small adjustment in for the land use review board, which is operating expenses primarily related to office fit up for that expanded operation. So. So on the page 6, we've got the one-time appropriations begin on page 6, I believe. What is that? Let's staple this in.
It's page 7 of the PDF that enters.
Yep. So to look at the one-time appropriations, there is the largest adjustments here are related to the Department of Vermont Health Access. So as Commissioner mentioned a moment ago, the Brattleboro retreat. So our alternative payment model, Unified Reconciliation Payment, is indicated here a $7.9 million. Again, I guess this silver lining to Senator Westman's point is it's been greater in prior years. But that's what's required to continue to support that service.
And that's just a simple bid count. That's not a
This is
unusual
more
pipeline. That's simply a bid count. They do a census, they determine how many, so
And you just don't know before.
Right.
So it's always.
make estimates, we reconcile the payments.
Yep. So that's the reconciliation payment.
Is it a lot more or has it been that way the last few years? That $8 million, 7.
No, it was over 12, fairly recently. That number comes to mind. It's been I guess to put it succinctly, the reconciliations haven't gone resulted in a return of funds to the state. They've all gone in the other direction. So also at Department of Vermont Health Access, $2.7 million one-time appropriation related to Vermont Health Connect software. That's required upgrades, essentially to migrate to a cloud-based platform to remain compliant with security and connectivity requirements of the Federal Data Services Hub. So that's the second largest adjustment here. I did want to mention, and Commissioner Gresham stated that there aren't really any policy, related appropriations here. The $1 million appropriation for the Land Access Opportunity Board, which is really for new granting programs, that could be construed as a new policy item. The Land Access and Opportunity Board had originally proposed to use carry forward funds, carry over from FY25, which had been appropriated for the administration and support of the board,
Right.
to which were not needed in FY25 due to carry forward from the prior year for administration and support of the board. So they wanted to use those remaining funds for a different purpose than administration and support of the board. And they had a compelling argument to put these funds to good use. We couldn't support the carry forward and use of those funds in a manner inconsistent with the appropriation language. So we proposed that we could revert the funds. They're part of the $21 million reversions amount in the BAA, and instead reappropriate a one-time appropriation for the purpose proposed by the LAOB. And I see that they're in later today. They can explain more about that. So while this reads as sort of policy related, it's not new money, and it's really legislatively, authorizing the use of funds that had already been carried forward by the board. So what's happened there. The other adjustments are, relatively small. There is, I guess I would point out, there is a appropriation to the judiciary relating to the Chittenden Pilot Court. So 139,000 there, and state's attorneys, a smaller amount, 36,000, also related to the Chittenden County Pilot Court. So that is, those are the costs associated with that initiative that I wanted to highlight.
Which is much appreciated, the court project, court pilot. Exactly what was needed in Rome.
And state's attorney, everyone was co-operative with that. That worked out well. It was a good joint venture.
Yeah.
Impressive how quickly it was implemented. Really, and involving so many different agencies and branches within the state government. So good to hear. Thanks, Senator.
Sure.
Looking at the transfer section.
Yeah.
So I'm sorry.
I got a quick question on what we'll refer to as the B3 project, the one we're talking about here with this. Is this just through the month of February? In Burlington?
I don't know. I know it was supposed to be short term because the amounts that we put forward they're not going to carry for a year. But I don't know what the time frame is.
I believe there was some discussion on the General Legislative Justice Oversight Committee about it being a short project ending somewhere around the end of February, and a report or something supposed to underlines it on that.
I think you're
Coming
right.
due
Yeah, I can't remember the timeline, but I think you're very close.
to measure the success of this program. We're looking
Right.
at more importantly before we spend more money on.
Before going forward.
Okay. Thank you.
But it seems like it's working now, so maybe we'll have a good.
Okay. Thank you.
Senator Watson.
Yeah, a question about, it's in the, one-time money with, E4, the Agency of Human Services about the waterway office complex and new communities.
Or D.
E4, so the 1100 E4.
Yep.
385,000. So this is for the Waterbury office complex. Is that associated with the new, any new lease that was necessary for the return to commute?
It is, I think it is. So the new leased space at Pilgrim Place.
Yeah.
The operating costs associated with that space are in, one of the operating sections within the AHS adjustments. The fit up costs are considered one time in nature, so they are incorporated as a one-time appropriation here. Now AHS could, better explain the details. I think there may be fit up costs in both the, previously existing facility and Pilgrim Place, but all fit up costs related to the return to office initiative are incorporated in this appropriation.
And this is money that is needed to cover basically existing costs that have, is that a fair statement?
Current.
Current costs.
It's just
Yeah.
that you're spending the money now. Are you waiting to spend?
I believe,
Already have some.
I believe so. And so I think maybe the way to put it would be, yes, if we are going to, if we are spending the money currently, then, we could run into a shortfall at fiscal year end unless there's an adjustment made to the budget.
Well, and in terms of like the ongoing, because the lease is presumably ongoing,
Right.
and so that will show up again in the budget, I would assume.
That will be in the base.
That's in the case
Right.
for the FY 27 budget. Yeah.
I have questions about that. But I'll put it, well, about the process for that, if I can ask them.
These are the amounts. Yeah.
You did that
Go
number,
with
yeah. We were talking to the number.
So, in the transfer section, which is on page 7 of the spreadsheet document, there's, I would say, relatively little of interest. I would point out, though, the first item, criminal history records check fund. So this is a net, essentially a little over $1 million shift. That fund supports the Vermont Crime Information Center. The salaries and benefits from the folks who work there. Their total operating costs are roughly 3.2 million. The revenue into the criminal history records check fund is about $1 million shy of that. So this is somewhat structural in nature, and we're working on it. Right? So revenues in that fund have not kept up with the additional costs, which is basically just payroll benefits, higher costs.
Revenues have actually declined in that fund. And so the source of revenue to that fund is the criminal history record checks come primarily from prospective employers. So background checks on employees. And this isn't a Vermont thing necessarily. This is anybody applying for a job anywhere in the country that requires a background check. If they have lived in Vermont, they dial up and perform a records check. And so the macro factor here is that there are simply less pings for background checks. Whatever that says about the macro economy, I won't speculate too much, but there's actually been, along with increasing salary and benefit costs, there's been an actual decline in that revenue. So that's what's going on.
And that includes fingerprinting, assume that's all part of the same.
I'm not so sure about that. I think this fund is really just related to those
And you have to pay a fee when you do a background check for fingerprinting. You pay a fee for that, but I don't know if that's also goes into this fund.
Yeah, I'm not sure about that, but I know what the I understand the driver in terms of the revenue change is related to the electronic record checks, and it really has more to do with out of state than it does with in-state. There's a significant discount to in-state background checks. I remember from when I used to work in private business, and you have prospective employees, if if you only had to do a Vermont check, it was very small, and it was the out-of-state checks that cost a lot more, and it works the same in reverse. And so
Makes sense. Okay,
There are a couple of small pilot, special fund, transfers, and this has to do with an appropriation made last year for, disasters in towns that are not federally declared disasters, but nonetheless, they can cost. There was an appropriation, the big bill last year, section D 917, yeah. To help towns provide reimbursement for towns that were mitigating, cleaning up. It turns out that, that $1.15 million appropriation was shy. So AOT came to us and asked if they could continue the program. And they suggested, and we accepted them writing an excess receipt for additional pilot fund revenues. This was originally funded through the pilot special fund. So we sent them and we wrote them an excess receipt and gave them that permission, but we told them that they needed to replace that money into the pilot fund. So you see here that there's some replacement for the T fund and some replacement for the general. And it turns out that there were two extra projects that needed reimbursement. One was the town of Concord, the other was the town of Norwich. So it came out to be about $350,000 more than they anticipated, but there was a fairly decent uptake for that program. Parties already addressed the cannabis regulation fund and how we inadvertently swept a specific $850,000 appropriation for a lab. We didn't realize it was supposed to be set aside. The two transfers in here help clean up that situation by placing that money into the fund. And then there you'll see that in unclaimed property and in liquor, we took in more money than was originally forecast. So that's to the good. $1.6 million in unclaimed property and $1.9 million in liquor. We also took in less money in sports wagering, $921,000 less than forecasted.
less than that estimate.
So those help, particularly the inbound from unclaimed property and liquor, help reduce the cost of it, net cost of this budget adjustment. And there on the last line, you see there's a little over $21 million of reversions, which also helps to reduce the net cost of the budget adjustment.
Yeah.
And that's kind of it. There's a language document that has one section we went through in very large detail. But really, I mean, most, in fact, virtually all of the language is following along what we just went through. But there are a few sections that I think are worth pointing out. You may want to spend more time on. Beginning with section 50, and that's, as Senator Booth just pointed out, that's the reserve language, whereby we are setting aside the unallocated amount from the 121 million that we had to start the VAA. We used about 48 million of that, and the net was 74 million, 0.9 that we are reserving temporarily and then carry forward into 27 to use to provide property tax relief. Also, as you mentioned, there's the $13 million for the ed fund that we never on reserve, so we can never use. Here we're on reserve. And then, section 53, we've also already went through that. There is in section 51, where we're amending the E100 section of the big bill. That's the section where we create positions. There is one requested change from the Land Use Review Board. There was an executive director position there, which was created as a limited service position. And they are asking, or they believe that maybe the intention is to make that a permanent position.
We made the other one permanent, but not the executive directors. Is that what we did?
I don't know. I know there are a number of permanent positions, but for reasons I don't understand, they would be better placed to explain. They want to create a full-time budget service position. I think that's the language. I hope I'm not misleading you. I'm sure you'll read through it anyway, but I think that was the main ones. Section 54 is the standard, or the plate carry forward language. It is in every VA. And as much as sorry to admit, that is the end of.
Yeah, it's sad.
I never.
It's actually, in terms of number of pages,
Yeah.
like remarkably slimmer
Yeah.
than budget adjustments of recent years. So,
Are you suggesting we should add to it?
well, I'm suggesting that the amount of surplus revenue is certainly a different. So.
All right, thank you. Any other questions? Financing, anything? Thank you for your work on this, and we will.
You're welcome.
Take another look through it and let you know if we have any.
We had a very long walk to get here.
Yeah.
We couldn't sneak in that door. I mean, I could practically get a zip line from my office to
Right, and then after the long walk around, of course, we had the metal detector.
Yeah.
No strip search.
You have a long walk
A
back.
little different.
No, actually, I think we can.
Oh, you
Yeah,
can
you can go out that way.
Yeah, I think we can go out.
You didn't see Doug Farnham in the hallway.
He's-
Probably.
There he is. Okay, great.
Okay, thank you very much.
All right, thank you. Take care. All right, we shall admit. Hello, Mr. Farnham.
Mr.
Chair. We just finished the walkthrough of the governor's budget adjustment. And we have to give us update. Senator Westman is nestling in for an interesting conversation.
I want you to appropriate money for a blanket and a pillow.
Maybe Parliament as emergency funds could find that.
I need some emergency relief.
So, and I don't know if this is similar to the update you gave to joint fiscals. Just, and hopefully Senator Norris will be back, because when we went around the room, or no, it was Senator Rennan that talked about ARPA programs and kind of where they are and which of the programs are we continuing with state fund, which probably is not what you were going to talk about, but that came up. So, but my understanding, you're mainly just going to tell us all the money that we had in ARPA is coming to a close, I think at the end of 26, or we return it. And so I think that's mainly what we're going to hear from you about, but tell us what you're going to want to talk to us about.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me, Mr. Chair. For the record, Douglas Farnham, Chief Recovery Officer for the state of Vermont. I know I'm scheduled until 2:45 and I do have an absolute hard stop at 2:50. But what I was planning to do is to go briefly cover the context of ARPA, just a little recap, just to refresh people's memory on the overall numbers, the timelines, the top level landscape. And then I did send a PDF that has kind of 3 different tables in it. One that looks at programs that have a blend of ARPA state fiscal recovery and general funds. The next section is just the ARPA funds, looking at what programs are still spending ARPA, and that would be the primary. If you're focusing on an area, that's primarily where any risk lies, right? Where there's still federal money that hasn't been expended and still has to be expended. And then finally, I have a table on just the general fund dollars that were general fund continuations of ARPA programs from an action taken in 2024, in late 2024.
So is that a different PDF, or that's PDF that you sent us, that table? So we could, so if there was a question about which which ARPA programs are being funded with general funding. We would just find that out the table where it's only a general fund cell is filled in, right?
Yes. Yes, Mr. Chair. So that PDF is 11 pages long. The
Yeah,
first 2 pages look at those blended programs, programs that weren't have some ARPA dollars remaining and some general fund. And then pages 3 through 9 deal with just the ARPA state fiscal recovery funds. So if you're curious primarily about programs that are ongoing there and what the risks are, where money still needs to be spent, that would be the far right column, total unexpended on those 6 pages or 7 pages. And then 10 and 11 are just the general fund programs that were originally created by the legislature using ARPA funds. And for various reasons, either risk or timing, mostly the Agency of Administration was given authority to revert their ARPA funds, apply them to an eligible expense somewhere else in state government that was immediately available, and then return the exact same dollar amount in general funds to continue that program. And last year, the General Assembly passed language that says any of those general funds that were used to continue ARPA programs that are unobligated as of 12/31/2027 would be automatically reverted. So there was a bit of a timeline placed on some of those funds. Even though they're general fund, there's no risk of losing those to the federal government. I think House and Senate, I think the legislatures want to keep an eye on those programs since they are multi-year programs, which is outside of the normal budgeting process that we traditionally use for general funds.
okay, and that page, the ones on page 10 and 11.
Yes, Mr. Chair. 10 and 11 is just general fund. It's color coded so you can see how much is remaining to expend. And many of those still have a large amount of general fund to expend, which I don't think is alarming because a lot of those places are focused on spending their ARPA state fiscal recovery first.
So the pages that also have color coded from the first 2 pages, that's need to be spent by the end of 26? Or do they also have 12/27?
So the last 2 pages, just the general fund.
No, the first the last 2 pages did have till end of 27, but the first 2 pages only have till the end of 26.
The first 2 pages, the ARPA to be expended is the 4th column from the right. And
Right.
that does have to be expended by 12/31/26. So that has less than a year remaining at this point.
And then the last column on the first 2 pages, does that match up with the last 2 pages?
Yes, it should match up with the last 2 pages.
Okay, I get it. Thank you.
So to take a step back, ARPA state fiscal recovery, of course, the state of Vermont received 1.25 billion. Just over 200 million of that went to the local fiscal recovery funds and was distributed on a per capita basis to municipalities. The Agency of Administration acted as a pass-through payer for those funds, but we do not have any role in the execution of those funds and the reporting. We don't have any actually even a special awareness of how those funds were spent because the towns directly report to Treasury on those expenditures. At a high level, I would say the vast majority of those funds were used in the revenue replacement category, and we've coordinated with Vermont League of Cities and Towns. And we believe that most towns spent those monies well, and that there's very little risk or no risk of federal recapture of that 200 million. They're on the same timeline to where they have until the end of 2026 to expend. There may be isolated incidents that crop up, but I think that's all we would likely see is a couple incidents here and there where a town thought they had something done and hadn't quite crossed their T's or dotted their I's. The other 1.049 billion was distributed to Vermont, and the General Assembly appropriated it primarily along 70% of that went to infrastructure style investments like weatherization, water projects, housing projects, broadband, and then about 30% roughly went to individually focused programs, incentive programs to help mitigate the impact of the remaining impact of the pandemic at that time. So primarily what we're spending on at this point is still the 70% of that was dedicated to infrastructure. We knew when the administration proposed some of those programs and when the General Assembly approved them, that they would take longer, that they would in some cases take the full amount of time to run. Municipal wastewater projects are not quick, right? They generally take a lot of time planning, permitting, and however we might like them to move faster, we have to do them properly as well. So I'd say in general, the position we're in overall with expenditure of ARPA funds, it's not a bad one. We have, if you go to the bottom of page 9, you can see we have less than 100 million. We have 96 million of ARPA funds as of 10/1/2025 left to expend. So the reason this is older data is that we don't get the 12/31/2025 data from the departments until a couple weeks from now. And then we file the report with Treasury on January 31st or whatever business day is closest to January 31st. And then it takes us about 2 weeks to crunch the numbers and put together these tables. So in mid-February, Mr. Chair, I will be able to provide an update through 12/31/2025. But we did have a good quarter. Our July to September quarter, we expended $52 million of ARPA. That was higher than our average burn rate in most of the quarters. So you do tend to see in the third and fourth quarter of the calendar year, you do tend to see a lot of our construction season start to hit in the invoicing. And because these are infrastructure programs, we've definitely seen a seasonal flow in the expenditure of ARPA funds. So I'm hoping that the fourth quarter from last year will also be a good one, and we'll get that 96 million down even further.
Okay, so you're not concerned at this point about it seems like a lot of the wastewater program projects are the ones that are over 50% that haven't been spent as of, whatever that was, end of September. You're feeling pretty confident, given that we have a quarter plus 4 more quarters, that'll get spent?
Mr. Chair, I would say I am still keeping an eye on those programs. I've been in constant contact with them over the last year to try to figure out, okay, how can those programs move the money a little bit faster? Where are you? What major invoices might be coming up to help your situation? I'm still concerned. Those are challenging programs. If one major project falls through, then you could see a gap open up. After 12/31/24, our options as far as reallocation of ARPA became extremely limited. We can only move ARPA money between projects that were obligated before 12/31/24. So I don't think that we have any action that we can take at this time, Mr. Chair, and I think we will get close to fully expended, but I think there is a chance that some of those programs won't hit full expenditure and that we'll have to do some problem solving in the summer and fall of 26 of this year, actually. And the problem with that as well is that because we're closer to the end date, our available obligations that we can shift money to are also shrinking every month.
Right.
And so I would say I'm not unconcerned, but I know those programs are focusing on spending that money, and I know the agency. I've also let the Agency of Natural Resources know, you're likely going to have to discuss the progress on these programs because that's the major area of unexpended funds is in the ANR water programs at this point in time, and those are very valuable programs. The large dollar amount that's in with VHCB for housing, I have very little concern that money will be spent. If you look at it proportionally to what they were appropriated, they're well on track to expend those funds. So it's primarily those ANR programs that when we were curing, we did reduce some risk in that portfolio. In 2024, when we moved around about $250 million of ARPA funds for general funds,
Right.
We couldn't get to all of the risk in the water portfolio that I would have liked to. We just didn't have the capacity.
Yeah. Yeah, because these are important things I'm worried about, because we're not gonna get the money to them for these projects if they don't get them done in time.
Right.
So maybe the chair of natural resources could crack the whip on.
Yeah, I think that would be good. I would love to hear more about these expenditures. But I just want to make sure that I am understanding if I may.
Go ahead.
So at this point, we can't be finding any new projects to give this money towards it. They have to have been already identified. Is that accurate?
That is accurate.
Okay.
Can you give more, sorry, Senator,
Yeah, go for it.
can you give more money to, like, so if there's a project on your list here that's spend all the money, could you give money to one of those projects? Like, well, here's some extra money.
Yes, that is allowed in the Treasury guidance until 12/31/26. Of course, the 12/31/26 is an expenditure period and it's an oddly extended closeout period. So we need to have the dollars spent by the state on invoices by that date.
Right.
Normally it would be, well, we have to get the work done and then invoices can come in for another month or two. So I don't think we'll be able to have any work done in December because we'll need to make sure all of the bills are paid. So there's a little bit of walking it back to, okay, when does the work have to stop so that we can pay the invoices? But yes, if a project is on the books, we can increase funds to that project. I think Treasury is going to be watching very closely any reallocations of ARPA funds, any adjustments between projects. We know that they have flags to look for that. So as long as there's an appropriate increase in cost and we shift money to pay for that, I think we'll be able to explain that to Treasury and it'll be allowed. We won't be able to shift money just to shift money, right? It'll have to be linked to something that we can demonstrate to them and prove to them is an actual cost increase.
Okay. So
And that could be us choosing to cover more of a project than we initially agreed to. That could be a legitimate change in a grant agreement where, say, we required 20% local match and then like, okay, well, this other project is won't spend the money, so we're going to increase how much we'll put towards this other project. That would be an allowable transfer between projects.
but we're running out of time of construction to do that as we get
Yes.
better off.
Yeah, well, and I just to make sure again that I'm understanding. So for each of these, the remaining dollar amounts, the projects that have been identified would theoretically use up all of the money. Is that like it's all been identified?
Yes.
Okay.
Absolutely. We were able to fully obligate the 1.049 billion by 12/31/24. So we had, countersigned agreements for the entire $1 billion, which we were very happy that we were able to do that, right? There was a chance we were going to lose funds. If we do have a dynamic now where AOA has to keep a close eye on programs because if a project is deobligated, if funds are deobligated during a quarter and then they're not reobligated before the end of the quarter, we are nearly certain that Treasury will demand those funds back. So we're allowed to transfer money, but if so we're trying to be very careful because we have a timing concern that if we end a quarter with deobligated funds, then it's very likely those will go back to US Treasury.
Okay. And just to follow up, I have more questions about specifics here, but I know we have limited time, so I may want to check in with you separately offline and or have you into natural resources
Right.
to talk about this.
Yeah, or have A&R and.
Yeah.
So I assume like A&R, whether it's sewer overflow, that $20 million, they have projects. It's not like they're still working with the town with like what projects you want to do. They have the projects identified. They just need to get them built this construction season.
Yes, Mr. Chair. I've been working a lot with Deputy Commissioner Kamen over the years on this. All of these dollars have a project associated with them, signed agreements, timetables. My main concern comes in the things that A&R might not be able to control, where something unexpected comes up over the course of a project. It's going to delay the project. How do we react to that? That's my concern, not the town's efforts or A&R's efforts, but the unknowns that might crop up over the course of this year once we break ground on certain projects.
All right, thanks. Yeah, I guess it would be good to know Senator Watson, like if there's something that's getting in the way that we can help them with.
Exactly, that would be useful to know.
Yeah, Senator Lyons.
Quick question. Is there any consideration in the guidance for seasonal weather effects? So, I mean, right now may not be the best time to do some of this work. Is there any consideration allowed for that? And then we know we can have problems in the summer.
Right.
So yeah, it seems like it seems like there's a whole year, but there isn't really.
Right. There isn't quite in my other hat, of course. My most of my hat at this point is on flood recovery as well. What I do know is that the ARPA law was written very prescriptively. So that 12/31/26, I do not believe Treasury has the ability to extend it. So it would take an act of Congress to allow Vermont any additional time, which I think in the current configuration of federal government is extremely unlikely. They are able to extend our ARPA Capital Projects Fund, which is separate and is 113 million. And I could come in another time or talk about that, but it is that is all going to broadband projects. And they are able to offer extensions with that particular fund. But with this one, we expect very little tolerance or latitude in that if we don't spend certain dollars, if we don't have that money out the door by 12/31/26, we anticipate Treasury demanding that dollar amount in January of 27.
Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Mr. Farnham, for this update and appreciate the years of work you've put into these ARA funds and tracking them. And well,
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate the opportunity to come speak with you, and I'm happy to come back later. I'm also happy to follow up with other committees or other members on specific questions. For a lot of the programs, I may not be able to answer the question directly, but I am able to guide you to the right people across state government for any of these ARPA programs. So I'm a good point of contact if you have a question about any coronavirus relief fund, ARPA state fiscal recovery, FEMA, or ARPA capital projects. Most one-time federal funds, I have an idea of at least where to start and how to dig into those.
okay, great. And just one more question on the spreadsheet, that the one between page 3 and page 9,
Yes.
are those also need to be expended by the end of 26, or are those different?
Yes, page 3 to 9, that is the pure ARPA state fiscal recovery. Those are the funds that need to be expended.
Okay.
So
Now,
what
then
that bigger spreadsheet is just to give you a look at all the programs that are closed out as well, Mr. Chair. Most of our programs at this point are actually closed out and did a great job, finished up, spent the money. So we included all of those in case you wanted to look back and see, okay, how were particular ARPA funds spent historically?
And then, so if there's in the page 2 through 3 through 9, if there's a program that has money expended, it would also be on the first 2 pages.
Yes.
There are 7. Okay. Thank you. Any other quick questions? Okay, we got you out on time.
Appreciate it, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you. So we will move to the Land Opportunities Access Board.
Hi, everyone.
We were just talking about.
How good things we have.
Yes.
Sure. Oops.
And you have some slides here.
Sorry, I'm slow here. Okay. I think I'm trying the right thing. There we go.
I'll get us started for the record. Renata Mata Figueroa, co-director of the Land Access Committee Board.
Hi, I'm Jean Hamilton. I am the other co-director for the LAOB.
Thank you for having us today. We're going to talk about BAA, and we begin everywhere we are, no matter what we're talking about, by sharing our touchstones. We listen generously and we speak our truth from our heart and mind. We make the way that we work together an example of what is possible. And we trust that we each hold a piece of the puzzle and that we need each other's pieces to understand the whole picture. Do you all consent to working with these touchstones in mind today? For our 15 minutes together? Thank you.
Great, thank you all. So yes, we are anticipating that today's presentation is mostly focused on our Budget Adjustment Act request recommendation for $1 million to be reinstated into our FY26 budget. This is intended $750,000 of that to put into our beginning developers fund in our partnership with DHCD on Homes for All. These would be pre-development seed grants for new beginning and emerging developers, and $250,000 of those dollars to be invested into community grants to support community emergency preparedness. So that's what we're planning to talk with you about today. A little, but I think you know the background maybe on the money got reverted, and this was always part of our FY26 budget. We were planning.
That's what we were talking about.
Yes, we were planning to launch these funds, and last August we found out, oh, the funds were gone now, and so we've been working hard this fall to, to let DFM know that no, that we really didn't have plans for those. And that we're glad that the governor has included this recommendation in his BAA proposal.
So you would have started these grants had you had the money.
The DFM did leave us with $350,000, and so that did allow us to kind of kickstart a pilot round, which we are currently launching. So we have one proposal round is due tomorrow, and then the next round is due in a couple of weeks. Those funds are an initial $350,000. These next rounds will build right into those and really are the full scale that was intended with our FY26 budget. We do find that it's helpful for folks to know and be on the same page about who we are as an LAOB. So we have a little bit of
It's helpful.
Yeah.
Or if you have any questions and you'd like to target your time very specifically, since we do not have a lot of time together, that's also open to you all as an option. So we could begin with questions if that's helpful, or if you'd like to hear from us more, specifically about like, what are these grant funds? What is the LAOB? We've seen you now for the last couple of years, but we'd be happy to tell you about the LAOB again. And but we also want to make this really productive for you. Is there something specific that would be most productive for you, seeing as we only have 10 minutes together?
I mean, I think we got the understanding of the budget adjustment, that some of this stuff might be more what we would hear when we talk about the budget for fiscal year 27. But if there's anything that you want to highlight to us, I don't see any questions in particular, but if there's something that you want maybe in preparation for 27 or issues that you're seeing or changes. I know, like, for example, there was one question of where the LAOB would be housed. And I assume that you feel that that's not settled, or is that still a question?
It's not settled forever. It is stable. Totally stable and functional right now.
Yeah.
And really, we are so glad and fortunate and celebratory of how functional it is. So it's great working with DHCD. We are now about to launch significant programs through the
hired 3 staff. So we went from 2 to 5, and I think we're going to be 11 by the end of the year next year.
You have all your, for this grant program you're using this money for is all your own staff. You don't use any of DHCB's staff or like their accounting staff or anything like that.
We do.
We do.
Yeah, but we're growing our programs. So we started as 2 co-directors, and now we have an executive assistant and 2 program managers. We don't have a whole lot of resources. So we've had to be very strategic and thoughtful about where are we going to invest these $3 million that we've had so far, too, with the one that was taken away. And with that, we kind of like looked at supply and looked at demand.
Yeah.
And then we have a program manager that's kind of like leading one side and leading the other side of how is it that we're going to invest our kind of strategic pieces of resources. And we can talk a little bit about what that is, if you'd like to hear about it, or what's most helpful.
Yeah, I guess to start, does anyone want to know about kind of back to the beginning of what is the LEOB? Who's on our board? What are we supposed to do? Is it helpful to cover any of that?
I would say, what do you think with the time you have, what do you think is the most
Okay.
important thing that you want to talk?
I think it's helpful to just give people a little update on what we've been doing and some problems we're seeing and.
Let's go there. Yeah, I think that's great.
Okay, so thank you all for co-designing this agenda with us. So why don't we start here on this timeline?
I love that.
Okay, great. So this is kind of in a nutshell where we've been since the beginning of the LEOB. So the LEOB was founded in statute in 2022. On this line here, you'll see, or sorry, on this above the green line, you'll see our appropriations over time. And then the milestones down here of what we have been working on. I think that some things to point to that are really helpful are that we do have this really great administrative foundation that we've developed with VHCB. From that foundation, you know, and prior to the foundation, we have this really strong functioning board of very engaged. We now have 12 appointing authorities. Our board members are highly engaged. We have monthly board meetings. We have
12 board members?
We do. Yes, we have more than that actually, because we have two positions from each organization, which allows us to really build a deeper bench, basically. We also have 3 standing committee meetings that meet weekly, and we participate in and host many community engagement activities over the course of the year. Over here on this side, you'll see that LEOB has also participated in many very exciting and cutting edge working groups, legislative working groups. These working groups, you know, just in a nutshell, have been highly productive spaces for us to really identify where are the gaps that our communities are falling through. And there's many things that we would love to highlight with you, maybe one-on-one or in your other committees, about what those gaps look like when you look at them through land conservation or housing or agriculture, or human services. You know, that, and one of those big gaps is these conversations are happening in those silos. And yet we know that issues like housing and access to land and access to natural resources does not actually live just in human services, just in farming, just in housing, just in economic development, or just in emergency preparedness. It actually exists across all those things. So silos are a big theme of something that we'd like to move beyond. We have some great ideas. People being left out is also another major theme.
And one of the ways that we are already kind of remedying that is that we are in all of these circles and in all of these places right now. And we are bringing folks together and, you know, getting them to think about problems from, like, looking at them from many different perspectives and encouraging this cross-sector collaboration to make sure that we're using our resources more effectively and efficiently.
You want to say anything about community engagement or our values or problems we're seeing?
I think focusing on the community engagement could be a nice thing right now. One of the ways that the LEOB has been supporting all of the different groups, for lack of a better word, that we've been working with, is by supporting this aspect of community engagement and helping all of the different sectors do community engagement better. We use a tool called the Community Engagement to Ownership model to help assess. Like, maybe you want to open it up.
I actually brought copies in case people would like them.
Sweet. Okay. To help folks assess, like, how is your community engagement right now? Are they just getting feedback and surveys, or are they actually engaging community members in creating programs and asking questions that meaningfully address the gaps in the systems? And I think this is a way that the LAOB is shining in helping us save resources across the system by supporting different administrators in not having to contract the community engagement work. And we will send more. We did not send enough. Yes, and
And if people are contacting you, so will you come and do this work for us, or are you reaching out to them or both?
in all ways, because we're in these rooms and then the systems, it comes up, right? We're having a conversation together and you tell me that you're hosting an event in a month and that you don't know what that facilitation should look like. And then we're there and then we work together and dreaming about what are the questions that you want to answer, and then how can we make sure that your community engagement is robust enough and supporting community members in participating, and like what is it that they would need to participate?
Are you working with state agencies, state departments, as they work for the environmental justice law that requires them to do something?
Yeah, so I think you all know, because you've written so many of these laws, that so like all rulemaking requires a certain amount of mandated community engagement. And so when we sit in those working groups, what we find is that there is a mandatory community engagement component, and that it's generally not working very well. So it often feels tedious. It often feels like a box to check. And what happens is we get rules written or laws written and programs developed that aren't meaningfully informed by the community. And then the programs don't really go anywhere because they're not actually connected with what are the community's needs, where is their momentum, where are their resources, and most importantly, what's actually going to prevent people from participating in this program, where are the barriers. And so what you were saying, Ornella, like we really have seen across the spectrum, we've worked with regional planning commissions who invited us in and said, can we make a contract with you to help us with our 181 future land use mapping, and thinking about, how do we assess the EJ?
Are you doing contract for service? Are you getting paid to do it?
We have done some contracts for services. We have done a fair amount of in-kind work that started in casual conversations and then ended up being really significant contribution from the LAOB that was not contracted. And those are expenses that we see in our budget, and we would really love to be in conversation with you all of how do we ensure that the state's resources are being used efficiently. You will hear us make the case and argue that investing the $3.2 million that LAOB is anticipating for our FY27 budget is one of the most effective and efficient investments you all can make in making sure that land and housing policy actually meets the community where it is and actually meets where we need to be. Because right now what we have is hundreds of millions of dollars going into housing and land access programs that are disconnected into multiple different agency silos that are not really effectively listening to what are the problems and opportunities on the ground, and then kind of stumbling over status quo solutions while checking a community engagement box. And this spectrum tool that we passed around is really about how do we create the most efficient and effective and impactful policy by listening to our community members first. That's the point. The most important point is we're never going to have enough money for everyone to thrive, like unless we act very strategically, very, collectively, and that we really eliminate where are we wasting money. And right now, I would say the current community engagement processes, because there is a lack of resources and a lack of skills, it's leading to a lot of inefficiency in policy.
Are you doing it just around housing and land access, or are you doing it for other programs? Like if an agency said we have this health program.
So for example, right now we're developing a contract with the state health improvement plan to do some community engagement activities around the housing priority within their plan.
So, but would you do if it had no housing component? like if they're just like, we have this thing about or some other health thing, vaccines, nothing to do with land access, but we want your expertise and community engagement. That would be it.
Because like, we would never just say, no, we won't do that. But we do recognize, like, we have a lane and something that is not at all housing. I mean, the truth about housing and land is it connects to a lot of things. So our job is pretty big already without vaccines. But we are passionate
We would
about.
prefer to support some other person in having the skills to do good community engagement.
Well, I
In the health
assume they would
department.
come to you and say like.
We would, because we see our work as a public benefit to all Vermonters. And we are in service of our community. So when folks come to us and they ask us for support in engaging community members, of course, we want the best possible engagement. We want community members to feel like they can contribute, to be supported well. And this is a public service in the ways in which we see our work, in which we're state funded, and we wouldn't say no. We would schedule it and we would probably support them in doing it. And we would ask for reciprocity. Maybe if they had the money, we would do it, we would receive it. And if they didn't, we would still do it.
But I think it also speaks to, our job as an LEOB to identify the barriers and the inequities in land and housing access. Like when you pull that thread, it quickly goes to some big kind of structural issues. And one of the big structural issues that, we also see in our Resilience Hub work is an issue of deteriorating civic engagement. And part of that deteriorating civic engagement is a lack of knowing how to be a good facilitator, how to facilitate complicated, nuanced, challenging, fraught community conversations. And we see that in the VERDA work that you all will have, you'll get a report on the rural technical assistance needs. We see that in all of the LERV work. We see that in, everywhere. We have a lack of civic engagement. And in that way, a lot of our work, which you'll see in our FY27, is based on building communities of practice. In that way, we absolutely invest in the facilitation skills and the community engagement skills, even at VDH, even when it's vaccines, and it's so far away from us, we are still connected because we need to get better at civic engagement as a state.
And right now, the way that I see this happen, and maybe this is out of line, so forgive me, is that I see us spending a lot of money contracting outside support. Hundreds of thousands of dollars from our state go into contracts with folks not from Vermont to come here and facilitate group process, do community engagement, write reports, and do work that actually, in my opinion, sometimes doesn't honor the skills and what is actually in Vermont and doesn't develop the skills in Vermont to do it. So then it becomes like an investment that we just keep making. Hundreds of thousands of dollars that we just keep pouring out without building the skill sets in our state. When our administrators and we hire robust administration capacity almost everywhere. We could all learn to do this better and not have to contract it. And save us those resources. And that's one of the ways that we're hoping with our advisory powers work that we can continue to build the skill sets, grow and develop the staff that's already here that's so passionate about the work that they're doing. Because one of the things I've learned working is that we have working in the state is that we have amazing committed public servants, no question.
Well, that's why I asked if you do contract for service, because I think there is a need for it within state government instead of contracting something. That's good.
We're also building a team. We have lots of contract facilitators and folks that we have been building skills with and for. So then we can also seed that and send folks in different places that are already here, that are already working and connected and tied to community in ways that are helpful and more effective to do the work that we need to do.
I see you have your 47 budget, but I don't think we should.
It's a teaser. It's out there. These numbers, you've seen them now.
Well, we will have.
Any questions?
Yes.
Can I don't have it here. What was last year's budget? Was it in here?
Yes, so
Earlier.
our last year's appropriation, we were in base at 1.63.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes, you're welcome. Okay,
And that was in the governor's recommend that dollar.
that dollar amount was in the
It
governor's.
didn't change through the process.
It did not change.
Did not
the
change
process
the
of the process. Thank you
Well,
so
thank you.
much.
Yeah.
Thank you. Please reach out and we would really like to spend time with you all, so let us know when it's works well to meet with you.
Great. Thank you.
There, thank you.
Okay, committee, any other questions?
Yeah.
Your question of whose drawer